I don't see Phil yet.
Oh, Phil's not going to be able to make it, as I
Oh,
understand it.
he's not.
Right.
Got it. Okay. As we scan the participant list, we have critical mass here.
I think so. Yes.
But David, if you're okay, why don't we?
Oh, yeah, please. Yeah, no point in waiting.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Welcome to the third meeting of the Water Rights and Water Management Working Group of the Russian River Water Forum. I'm Mike Hardy. I haven't met you, and I'll be facilitating today. We're just going to do a few preliminaries, as we have in the past, just to make sure everyone is oriented on the technology side of things. We'll go over the agenda very quickly and get into the presentation, which is largely a report back to you on an outline of the proposed work product. So let's go to the next one. And in addition to the work product, we want to also describe the proposed water rights category, buckets of water, of course, that would be used in the work product, and then we'll review what the next steps and upcoming meetings are. And of course, if we're looking for input both today, but also if there need to be additional opportunities, we'll address that as well. Next. So David is going to address the big topic, the work product outline, and that will take about a half an hour on the agenda. And then the other items, we've got 15 minutes identified for the water rights piece, and then 5 minutes for us to talk about what's coming up next. Next. These are our consistent participation guidelines. I appreciate that everyone has been willing to observe them. I do want to be clear that the working group members were designated to participate on this working group. Members of the public are invited to observe, but that is the role for the public. In these meetings, it's important that working group members are able to participate. So next. So just real quickly on the Zoom logistics, if you're a working group member and you want to rename yourself as working group, assuming you know how to rename yourself in Zoom, please use the virtual hand raise tool to get in a queue if you'd like to provide some feedback. If you keep yourself on mute, that's always helpful in trying to head off any disruptions from technology. When you do make a comment, or if you offer a comment, if you let everybody know your name and affiliation, that will help as well. And then I'm going to ensure that we create space for working group members to participate fully. And then, as usual, we will post the presentation, the notes, and recording to the Russian River Water Forum website. Okay. Please use the chat only for technical assistance. We have a lot of people on, and we could end up spending a lot of time in chat and being diverted from the presentation. So it's really helpful if we can use the screen and the audio to be communicating with each other. If you are having a technical issue, please use the chat. All right, next. And I am going to promptly turn it over to David Tabor.
Good morning, everyone, or actually good afternoon. Before I start, I just wanted to do a shout out and a thank you to Nicole Whipple, because she was able to send us some great information in terms of background on some of the tribal rules and rights. And the reason I'm doing this shout out is In the course of developing this presentation, we will find big gaps in information. And there's nothing that will degrade our credibility or the presentation's credibility than information that is wrong. And so please, if you have good information that you don't think we have, please forward it to us so we can be dealing with the best. Because we're in some cases scrounging around looking for where can we find out about X, Y, or Z. So do sort of think of that. Think of us poor information starving people. So the drafting team for what you're seeing here is me, Phil Williams, who's not able to be here, and Kristen Peer. Thank you both to Kristen and to Phil for helping keep this clean and clear, so it's more useful. And the core team, these are people who review things and submit things to us so that we can get the best information in there. Thank you to all of them as well. There's a lot more to go. This is just an outline. Don't expect to see any conclusions or anything else. We're just trying to make sure what the structure of this educational presentation should be. We're hoping that you folks have had time to take a look at the outline over the weekend. It was mailed to you on Friday. If you haven't, that may be a more digestible format for you to see the big picture than in this PowerPoint. I'm not saying ignore the PowerPoint, but we can only get so much on a page, whereas what we sent to you, you're able to see a little more of the flow. So the PowerPoint is the same content, it's just the format's different, and as a result, it's a little tougher to see. Anyway, thank you to all those folks. So just to refresh everybody's memory about what we're trying to do, what we've been chartered to do, is essentially it's a educational presentation, basically so that people who may not know about the impact of water rights, what they are, how they're affected, and how the future will impact them. That's what we're trying to do, is make a clear presentation of what is. We're not advocating anything. We're not trying to adjudicate anything. We're simply trying to say, here's the best information we have, the best science about these two scenarios. We've talked about these before. We just want to remind everybody we're basically using the scenarios from the two basin solution because there's a lot of good information that's already been digested for that. And this is going to be a living presentation. The first edition of this will probably be right around Thanksgiving time. This will be for the planning group in advance of when PG&E actually submits their initial draft. But there's a lot of things that simply won't be done by then. We'll have placeholders for everything we want to say, but there are a number of modeling and analytical exercises that probably won't be completed even this calendar year. So we'll probably have a monthly edition of this that just gets more and more complete. But we want the structure to be the same so people don't have to hunt around and get lost. So the purpose is to make it just have people understand the implications and expected outcomes for these two scenarios. Shouldn't be any question on this, so let's move on. Okay, what I did was basically divided the outline into 4 sections. The introduction section is really background, and I, being a computer nerd, had slide 0. Well, why do we start with 0? This is the one that we have among ourselves, but we don't present to anybody. Why do we even have this this presentation? And what I'm going to do, if this is all right, is I'm going to walk through this page, and then we'll have a Q&A on this page for people so we can get people's issues immediately or as immediately as possible. So the purpose statement should not be a surprise at all. This is what we got authorization from the planning group to do. This is essentially what we talked about. I think it was 2 meetings ago. Slide 1 is sort of a throwaway. It's just a title page and saying thank you to all our participants. And I don't think there's much point in reviewing that. But I think slide 2 is important. Of course, everybody who's on this working group and most of the working groups will understand what the Eel River Basin is, what the Russian River Basin is, and what the diversion looks like, where it occurs, and the basic, overview of what are we talking about here. But boy, there's a lot of people outside of our groups that won't understand this, and we're hoping that this will be informative enough that this presentation will, or slides in this presentation, will be used in various public forums. Just with the general public, with committee meetings, with the press. So we need to have this sort of map showing the basic system elements and the size of what we're talking about. I mean, the Eel River is a big river. Although we're only talking about the diversion, people need to understand the scope here of how many counties it goes through. The next slide was something requested by the planning group, and this is basically trying to characterize what were these rivers like prior to the dam's existence. Whether we choose 1905 or 1900, it doesn't really make any difference. It's basically before the dams, what were these rivers like? For example, what were the populations served? What were the number of water rights? Just some basics so people understand, oh, all right, so it was back in the day, the population served was much, much smaller. And the types of water use were much more limited. There wasn't any industrial, for example, and municipal was pretty minor back then. Next up, we're going to discuss this quite a bit later today, but this is basically a one-page summary of what are the types of water rights, who holds them, what do they get, what is the seniority one versus the other, so that people understand that in case of a drought, there's a priority, and the people at the bottom of the list don't get as much water as they might want. And people need to understand that and understand kind of not exactly where they lie, but where the big groups of water rights end up. And then slide 5 is a one-page comparison of here's scenario 1 with a diversion, here's scenario 2 without a diversion. Now, when it comes to describing without a diversion, I don't think there's a lot of debate or a lot of ambiguity. But when it comes to with a diversion, right now, we don't know a lot of the specifics about the diversion. We will know more once various design studies are done. But for the moment, we simply have to hand wave and say, here's what a diversion looks like. And for the purposes of being able to say anything, we basically have to live with how the two basin solution defined the diversion. Because the moment you go away from that, all the modeling they did and the things you can conclude from it essentially go up in smoke. We know that what the two basin solution was hypothesizing isn't what's going to be there, but we have to start with something. And so we have essentially a placeholder for the moment. And as decisions are made and better modeling is done, we'll get much more precise about what the diversion is, or will be, in terms of how we're discussing these comparative options. So with that, I'd like to hand over the microphone. Please raise your hand and any questions or issues here.
Understanding that the content is still to come. This is the outline. Vivian.
It's just a structure. Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry, Glenn, your hand is up first and then Vivian. My apologies.
Okay, and hold on just a quick second here. I've been talking all morning and a little hoarse. Some things that need to be, and I really appreciate the effort to try to keep it balanced and broad perspective here and put all the facts on the table in a non-biased way. I think that's very important and very much support that. Some things that should be here that are omitted more or less by accident, I think, is when we're talking about the original Eel River, we need some charts and graphs showing the abundance of salmon in the Eel River. there were up to 800,000 Chinook, for instance, historically in the Eel River. That's down to now on the order of 3,000. There have been some very negative impacts of the water diversions in the dams over time, and those need to be understood too, because those are impacts that we live with today, and that there are potential solutions that could remediate or mitigate some of those impacts. So we need to deal with Chinook, coho, and steelhead, all of which are ESA listed. Possibly other fish have suffered as well for lack of water. So that's one thing that we can do. We could supply some slides to that effect. The other thing is that we need somewhere a list of what the diversions have been, a chart of what the diversions have been over time, particularly in the past 20 years. Since the biological opinion went into effect and the ESA obligations went into effect, there's been considerably less diversion allowed. And we need to look at that because that shows, number one, that the basin has already adapted to a much smaller diversion. Number two, that's much more in line with what likely diversions will be in the future because the ESA isn't going to go away. And the fish in the river system in the eel are still ESA listed. So we need those two. And again, we can help put those slides together. The other thing is that there are several types of water rights that are not being considered in the chart, particularly federal water rights. And those come in three groups. One is ESA water obligations. That is a federal obligation that preempts state water rights in any water contracts. There's Clean Water Act obligations. We have to make minimum TMDL measurements, minimum TMDLs. There are also tribal water rights that need to be considered. And those may be unadjudicated, but they're still there and very much a reality in the legal framework. And it occurs to me that there's a fourth batch of federal water rights, and that is this is a wild and scenic eel is a wild and scenic river. There are water obligations that are attached to that historically and currently. So they're federal water rights. There may also be some state fish flow water rights too, 1707, I think, and that needs to be a different batch. It's a different bucket. So
we'll get to those a little more detail, Glenn, in the second part of the agenda, but thanks for raising.
I guess my point is that there's more than just private water rights that need to be considered. There's a whole bundle of other rights, many of which are preemptive.
And I just a question for you, Glenn. Will you also be able to supply some fisheries information about the Russian? Because it's not as big a river, it's not as obviously the fish population wasn't as large, but we have two ecologies that have been affected. And I didn't know if you had access to any Russian River fishery.
We could look that stuff up. I'll put that in the to-do list.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. All right, can I move on here? Vivian, and then Reggie. And these are just the first 5 slides. I want to say we've got 15 more. So yes, Vivian.
As a follow-up to Glenn, that is, there's a Water Rights 101 slideshow presentation that's available from the State Water Board that they presented on August 3rd. And it names types of water rights. And in the Russian River, we have and helped develop a captive breeding program for coho and everything that went with that. So there is information on the fisheries there as well. And I'll let other people speak and move on. Thanks,
Vivian. Reggie, your hand's up.
I think you brought up a good point, which is you know, the effect of Eel River water on the Russian and fisheries. And so maybe just putting a note to explore the conversation between, you know, foreign water, meaning water that was never originally in the Russian, and its effect on Russian River species, given the fact that, there has been, for 100 years, transfer of water. But, before that 100 years, fish were doing just fine in the Russian before any Eel River water. And so I just wonder if we could have a moment, not now, and put a pin in the conversation about how we address the concept of foreign water and whether we really factor it into the, importance of flows that are necessary for fish on the Russian, given the fact that it is not, in that scenario, like a natural element of the water rights makeup of the Russian. So let's just put a pin in that. I think it's interesting to like how it would play with our analysis on water rights in the future.
Okay, thanks, Reggie. I think, David, we should seize the moment and go to the next.
I agree. Yeah, we need to power through. Okay, next. So I didn't know what else to call this other than sort of the I'm going to call it bedrock information, that we can't talk about effects until we understand the supply, the demand, and areas of uncertainty. So the basic idea is that the water supply on the eel will be essentially unregulated, where the after the dams are removed, there'll still be regulated storage in Lake Mendocino. One of the things that we need to be able to show is what does the Lake Mendocino look like? And in order to make it just simple, because you have to keep, if you have too much data, people just lose it. They don't keep track. So showing the number of years that Lake Mendocino is filled and the number of years that Lake Mendocino goes dry. And that is a with diversion, without diversion. And these are simply, here's the water model. This is simply, we can't, it speaks for itself. This is the best science we've got. And yes, there'll be errors and assumptions, but we have to get that into the picture. What does the water supply look like? Next, a slide about what do we anticipate climate change will be doing to us. And again, this is simply taking, here's the best science we've got, and we'll try to make this graphical so people don't just have their eyes roll back and get confused. The basic idea is that winters will be wetter and summers will be drier. That's the easy way of saying it, but also drought years will be more frequent than historical. And you can quibble about this climate change model versus that, but this is the consensus of all of them. And again, this is taken straight from the work that TBS chartered. Slide 8 is the, there's a lot of things we just don't know or haven't measured. And those information gaps lead to modeling gaps. There's a lot of places where we can't say what the effect will be. And the only honest answer will be, we don't know, or we won't know until it happens. And pardon me. No one wants to hear, I don't know, but that is the honest answer. We don't want to be in the guessing business. Next is, what do we expect the water demands? And this is an overlay of tribal demands, various regulatory and legal demands, as well as human demands on the eel and the Russian. And again, this is an area where we'll first expose one of our information gaps, that we know a whole heck of a lot more about certain segments of each river than we do about others. And once you get below confluences, when you're talking about the Eel River, once it's up in Humboldt County, there will be very little for us to be able to say. If anybody knows of, anybody knows of any modeling that actually is sound about the Eel River, please let us know, because our expectation is there's very little that's been done there. And we'd love to be able to say something meaningful.
Can you go into that a little bit more about what, I know we've talked on the side of this, David,
Yeah.
on information needs, but will you describe a little bit more about what you mean by there's very little information Are you talking about flow information, about water
Uh,
rights?
Flow and also demand. So as we understand it, there aren't
Got it.
that many stream gauges on the eel, and then there also are a whole lot of unmetered demands that, even if they're illegal demands, such as marijuana growers, they still suck water out of the river, and it is helpful to have an estimate of that. Otherwise, you can't inform your model.
Yeah.
So my personal guess is that to the confluences and due to the small number of water rights, there's not going to be a big impact here. But we want to have apples to apples that we can say, as to our best of our ability, here's what we think is going to happen. With
Yeah,
that,
that's helpful.
Yep. And by the way, when we say expected water demands, there's the legal ones, and then there's the people ones, and they're really they're different animals, but they all have to be considered in the model. And we can.
So I'll send you some information. There is a lot of information on flow on the Eel River for the segments that we want to look at. There's an unimpaired flow average of 412,000 acre feet a year. And I'll send you the study at Cape Horn Dam, essentially.
Okay.
And I'll send you that study so we can start filling in some of those gaps.
That's great. Excellent. And
I'll
don't
follow
forget,
up with our team on
that'd
the
be
North
great.
Coast from CalTrot to help with that.
That'd be great. And again, the farther along down the eel, the more uncertainty there is. But any place we have data, I'm a data junkie. Other questions? Looks like Glenn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see a similar analysis for the Russian River too. You see over time, what is the demand been? What is, maybe we can project what it might be from that.
Oh, the Russian. Oh, absolutely.
I think that's probably better documented.
Oh, yeah. And it's pretty well modeled. Again, below the confluences, the major one being Dry Creek Valley, things get a little more uncertain. But even there, they have good modeling down well below, I think, almost all the way to Guerneville. They have pretty good modeling.
It would be really good to see what the demand and withdrawals in the Russian River have been and how that's progressed over time. That would be really good.
Yeah, we won't. Again, this is,
modeling, right?
It's not only modeling, but we need to keep this brief. So we're going to be talking about a point in time. This is our forecast for where it will be going forward.
Yeah.
The historical stuff, I don't know the planning group will care about that. But Sonoma Water has a lot of stuff in this area.
Yeah, but I'm looking at a potential graph of growth of demand over time.
It would be nice if we had that info. I don't know that we do for either river, frankly. We need to keep going here. So again, this is, at this point, what we're doing is, here's just the background data. Let's move to the next slide.
Right.
So now we have a slide that simply says, even though what we're doing is comparing two scenarios, we really should just talk about, here's what we understand, or is the best we understand, of the impacts of the dam removal when it happens. The dam removal by itself, assuming the diversion is there or not there, the dam removal doesn't really change the picture for the Russian very much. It may change the picture for the eel. This may be an empty slide because we may not have the modeling to say anything. But we wanted to have a placeholder simply saying, hey, in summer months, some of these, there might be a couple dozen water rights that are affected. And simply making sure that if we have that data, we have a place to put it. But that's not the meat. The meat is what happens on the eel and the Russian with and without the diversion. And what we do, you can see that we deal with the Eel River at the beginning here as two slides. We're not confusing it with the Russian. And again, hopefully we have modeling to support this, that the interbasin transfer or not does have an effect on the eel only in the winter months, because in the summer months, the diversion won't be running. So it is what it is. The reason we break down the Russian with more granularity is because we know we have the modeling to support it. So this is the upper Russian River, which is basically from the PVP output all the way down to Healdsburg, and the lower Russian River is Healdsburg out to the ocean. And this is a slide each on, here's what it is with the transfer, here's what it is without. To the degree we can, we want to make this a map. People hate tables, and it gets very squirrely very fast. The challenge will be keeping this informative. Everything, slide 13 through 18, keeping it informative enough, but simple enough so that the audience doesn't go to sleep. That's always the challenge with highly technical presentations. So again, question time.
Any questions or input for this, was it 6, 7 slides that are proposed here? John,
Have you looked at, I guess what you're trying to do is you're providing an infographic that will explain the technical details. Do you have anybody you're working with who's, competent or has done infographics before to display a lot of technical information?
I believe we have a resource within within our group, but if you have particularly someone who's expert at water issue presentations, we may well need to call them, because making infographics work is really hard. It's I did marketing for 20 years, so I know how to do a good presentation, but condensing information so that a real audience can get it that's an art.
Is there a capacity to do some interactive stuff? I know.
What do you mean, actually animated or that sort of thing?
Someone animated or click on this. I do have a source. Let me check up on them, see if they could do this type of work. The company does have a community giving where they will dedicate resources to natural resource issues. And be able to provide this type of interactive displays. So
that could be really cool, because animation allows you to get a lot more information on there without confusing people. And the Kearns and West folk do have some resources there. Do you know if the Kearns and West person is a animator type as well as a infographic type?
I can follow up with them on that specific question. Yeah, he's done a lot of work for water agencies on infographic type stuff, which is why we chose him for this project. But yeah, let's talk afterwards, and we can get into the details of what might be useful features to add.
Yeah,
Thanks, John.
and John, if we can get some of that of your magician's bandwidth, that would be great.
I'll check into it. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, John.
Other questions? Vivian, you're back.
Quick question, you haven't described yet what you mean by buckets.
Oh, yeah,
Yes, we're going to do that next
Yep, it's basically the categories of water rights.
in like 3 minutes
Yep.
or 5 minutes, 5 minutes max. So thank you for being patient, Vivian. Any other
Okay.
feedback on this set of proposed slides for the structure? No?
Okay, let's go.
I have
And
a
that-
really quick
Oh.
comment. I'm sorry. When we're talking about water rights, is there like obligations when you have those certain water rights that maybe we can hit on or discuss? Like
Let's talk about that when we're talking about the categories of water rights, because I think that is important. That's really important.
okay, thank you.
And I think, Nicole, that's something also that we heard a little bit earlier, a reference to as well. So I suspect there's some significant interest there.
Yep. Okay, let's move on. And then you have to have a conclusion. And what we haven't presented to the audience up to now is just the understanding of what happened in the drought years, particularly 2021 and 2022. And just letting people know, okay, even with the diversion, here's what happened. Here's the kind of things that will happen under the wrong kind of adverse conditions. And during that period, only the tribes and the most senior water rights, and of course the legal requirements, were had access to water. a lot of other people were told you may not pump, and the fines were pretty severe. So I don't know if they levied any fines, but they had the right to fine. My head says $1,500 a day, but it might be slightly. That was the kind of number that the state water board was throwing around. So this is basically saying, okay, in adverse water conditions, here's what the state water board will have to do. And then the audience can make their decisions about what they want to do about all this. But we wanted to simply present that information. So
Okay.
comments on this?
Hey, Laurel's hand is up.
You should include the water sharing program in this slide. That
Sure,
was, I'd say half the people on this call were involved in it.
I was.
And it was probably the only example in the state of senior water rights holders being willing to share with juniors.
Yep.
And that's going to be pretty important in the future.
Yep. And we also need to put a commercial in there because I don't believe that that is funded going forward. There's an intention to do so, but I don't believe it has actually got an owner and a budget. And I
It
think
was never funded. There was no funding. We all volunteered.
wow. Well, we need to put a commercial in there for that, in my opinion.
Okay, Nicole.
Including only the tribes, that doesn't sound correct to me. Is there a specific tribe that you're calling out? Because I know that, again, I am also, not only am I a tribal member and resident of Round Valley now, but I also grew up in Redwood Valley. And so I know, and I have ties to Sherwood or Willits, that these tribes, Sherwood Valley, Round Valley, Redwood Valley, Hopland, Pinoleville, all had no access to water. So this is kind of a false statement here. I think you need to clarify on what the point is or what you're trying to get at. I mean, maybe they have.
So it should say only some tribes.
Well, and we can
there-
actually go to the curtailment and find out, be precise as you're saying, David, so that the
Right.
information we're presenting is
And
absolutely.
the federally recognized tribes, I don't believe can legally be curtailed, as I understand it. So at any rate, yes, thank you for that clarification.
Thanks, Nicole.
And in any case, this content section is merely meant to say, here's what we're going to try to convey. It's not going to use these words, so don't get hung up on that. It's merely saying what goes in this container.
And so
Other questions?
I know we're moving quickly here. We are just about on schedule. We do want to talk about the different buckets of water rights. Before we end today, we'll loop back to the other ways to provide input if you haven't had a chance to review the material that was sent out and you're just sort of seeing this for the first time. Obviously, we're working on a very fast track, and today's quick presentation is a reflection of the short timeline, but that it is important to give you all a chance to look at what's being proposed, digest it, and then provide your feedback so that you have realistic expectations about what's going to be coming later, and then we have the best possible product. So thank you for being willing to accept a quick presentation now, and I think we ought to switch to the water rights buckets discussion.
Yep. Okay, so I just coined this word buckets because I wanted to have a shorthand. There are many more groupings or buckets we could put in here. You could divide it by decade. You could do all kinds of things, but we need to keep it simple so that you can summarize things either in an infographic or a table. And so, although we know that tribal water rights are highly variable by the tribe and by the location, we simply put them in one place because we don't want to have people's heads spinning with that complexity. Riparian rights is the next category we've got. And I'm just going to interrupt myself. we considered all the federal mandates, ESA, minimum flow, all those kinds of things, as things that we simply have to comply with no matter what. It trumps all water rights. They simply exist. But to go into that complexity is simply pointless. No one would ever get out of that rat hole in a presentation like this. You can spend an hour describing the issue, and by the end, people will just walk out of the room. So we're trying to boil things down. So we put all tribal rights in one bucket, all riparian rights in one bucket. And then we looked at pre-1905 appropriative, because 1905 appears to be the dividing line for when the dam decisions were made and when the impacts of those dam decisions hit water rights per se. The next bucket is between 1905 and 1949. Yes, there's differences between them, but for the sake of keeping it simple, we just put those as one big lump, and then post 1949 as another big lump. What's an appropriative right? This is where a human makes a claim on some water, but they do not own the property by the river. A riparian right is when you own the river, you own the property and you get some water rights along with the property. The small print is our understanding of what those rights are entitled to. There's different kinds of water and there's different kinds of flows. So it's sort of surprising that the most senior water rights, the legal water rights, don't have a right to the PVP or Lake Mendocino water. They may get some, but they don't actually have a legal right to it. So that's why the fine print is there. Exactly how we're going to present this, I imagine, is as sort of a checkbox table, simply having the water rights on the left and in fine print the types of water along the right. You simply have check boxes of yes, you have right to this, no, you don't. Otherwise, all this wording will drive people crazy. And you'll note that the post 1949 has this magical 10,000 acre feet per year reservation, but that's only for some people and only under certain conditions. So even in just this boiled down version, there's still too much complexity. So to answer Glenn's basic question earlier on, was we were considering all the governmental mandates as an overlay to this. The models, I believe, do take all that into account. But since those federal and state things are non-negotiable, they simply are, and they simply trump everything. There's no point in putting them on here, right? Those things won't be affected. Whereas some of these water rights will absolutely be affected by whether there's a diversion or not. So with that, let's take questions, and it would be great if we could first say, are these the right buckets? And then have amendments as we go.
Hey, Nicole, your hand's up.
My apologies, I didn't blow it.
Oh, okay. Laurel, is your hand up?
Yes. Actually, before you gave that spiel about the state and federal endangered species water, I think it should be in here in detail, because there's big differences between some of the decisions out of the State Water Board and what the National Marine Fisheries Service considers beneficial for salmonids as part of their biological opinion. So you can't say that there's one amount that's it. And right now, the biological opinion is being redone. So this is going to change in the future. So I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that while, yes, there is an amount of water that we need to protect fish, what comes out of the dam now is not what NMFS has recommended. So we have a big gap between what we're doing and what might be in the best interest of the fish.
So I'm going to put a target on my back, and I'm going to say something, which I think we have a problem, that a water right is a legal thing. And if the State Water Board and some other agency disagree on the amount of water, that's for them to fight in court, not for us to fight for them.
Well,
We're-
it's not that simplistic, David. The Sonoma water people cannot manage Lake Mendocino without being in compliance with those laws. So, and I think a lot of the people on these calls are pretty concerned with the fish. That's what this is all about. So not having complexity to how water is managed for fish in a presentation like this doesn't make any sense to me.
So Laurel, this is Mike, and I think I appreciate the input, and I think it sounds to me like really the challenge for the drafting team is, there's like a whether and a how question here. And I think finding the right balance so that it's not ignored, and that it also doesn't, the various requirements and that context doesn't overwhelm the central purpose of the presentation is a challenge for the drafting group. And it's going to come back to this group as well once we've got something more fleshed out. So I appreciate, I hear what you're saying, and I think it builds on what Glenn was offering as well a little bit earlier. And the drafting group, including David with the target on his back, will be wrestling with how to do that.
And actually, Laurel, I was we've gone back and forth on this in our own discussions. I was calling these things governmental mandates or governmental requirements. What's a better word for that?
Fish flows.
Is it just fish, or aren't there other agencies as well?
Nope. There's no frog flows that I know of.
No, but what
I'm
about?
sure somebody can tell me if there is. But
No, I was wondering, are there Clean Water Act mandates or other things along those lines?
Well, maybe
I would have to ask probably the dam operators that question, but I don't believe there is.
Maybe
Okay.
what we can take back to the drafting group is at least a task that we ought to summarize and do our best to summarize all of the different kinds of requirements. I see Sam's hand is up, and maybe he could. Glenn, how would you feel if Sam, did you want to comment on this, or do you want to comment on something else?
Hi, my name's Sam, for those I haven't met yet. I work at the State Water Board. I would suggest not calling things like the fish flows water rights. They're just apples and oranges, and it's like a regulatory overlay.
Right.
Fix supplies, and I think everything Laurel said, it was right. I always, she's usually right. And so I just consider it maybe something affecting supplies in infographic rather than like calling it a water right, because it'll invite misunderstandings.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. So we'll go put our thinking caps on based on this input and figure out how to address this regulatory overlay, so to speak.
That's the essence of my comment too. Is we can't ignore it, but it isn't a water right. It's a preemptive governmental obligation.
Okay.
However you word it, we need to make people aware of it, that is a big bucket and it has to be full.
So we're receiving strong encouragement, so we'll bring the encouragement back to the drafting group. Okay.
All
Reggie,
right.
is your hand up, Reggie, or not?
It is. I'll just be very brief. I think it's important to note those, of course. It's awesome to have a Zoom room full of those that have commented already, so that's excellent. The only caveat I want to give there is that there should be some asterisk there that while there are required fish flows for the Russian, I think it's opinion of a lot of folks that look at these water rights that those flows, environmental flows, are required in absence of the history of continued flows. As in the water rights can be shut off without without having to do an analysis of environmental flows, because those are required from the Russian River entity, not required from the Russian entity, plus, or with the addition of Eel River water. So that discussion point I think is important when we look at environmental flows, because I think often we look at environmental flows and flow requirements by Russian as an argument for more additional Eel River flows, when in reality, Russian River was conceived of, built, and well, not built, excuse me, was created before people were around. And there shouldn't be a requirement to add up all the flows historically, including those flows from the eel. And so I think there should be a caveat there. And just full disclosure, I'm here with my hand raised for California Drought, working to find a solution that can work for both basins, including diversion of flows that don't have a de minimis effect on Eel River fish population. So want to make that as two caveats together.
Got it. Thanks, Reggie. Any other input on these buckets, and as well as the feedback that has been offered? No, not at the moment, at least. Okay. Well, thank you very much for allowing us to lead you on this very quick tour of what the first version of this framework for the product. And we'll take this all back and come back with the next version. David will be revving his engine. Matt, is your hand up?
It is, and so I didn't realize if we were at the end or not here. Just a couple of really quick high-level comments. This might be beyond the scope, at least one of them of this meeting here, but just echoing what Reggie said, I also think as a matter of just fact out there's a widespread understanding that a lot of the fishery flows on the Russian side, the buyout flows, are subject to reconsideration. And there's been, hints that there's plans announced to reconsider those depending on what happens with the diversion. And so obviously we can't predict what's going to happen, but I think we can put an asterisk on that and work around that and understand that those flows are not necessarily set in stone as constraints in the project. It might just be something that flavors. If our goal is to provide people with an accurate position of what's going to happen without the diversion, we might want to note things like that. The second thing, and this might be beyond the scope, but a lot of folks have pointed out to me offline, there's a huge area of uncertainty on the Russian side. These buckets are great, but as to which of these buckets certain rights go to, particularly like the uncertainty around whether folks are pumping ground or surface water or both, or one or the other, depending on what works best at the time. I mean, there's a whole lot of uncertainty there that I assume is going to flavor our analysis, but I might be reading ahead. But I'll leave it there.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
There is a lot of uncertainty, particularly because the landowners will claim that if they aren't by the river, that their surface water has nothing to do with the Russian River Basin, but the State Water Board says, oh no, it's one system. And so there's honest disagreement about that even now, let alone for the future.
Yeah, it has pretty big implications, right?
Okay, so let's just take a look at what is coming at us here in the next few weeks. Jim, did you want to cover this, or do you want me to?
I can just really quickly, Mike. Yeah, so just the next 2 meetings of this full working group should be on your calendars. We sent out invitations a few weeks ago. They're coming up on October 16th, which is a Monday, and then November 13th, which is also Monday at the same time from noon to 1. And the drafting team has, and actually the core team also has set as the deliverables for those meetings. This next meeting will be a full draft of the work product. So that is the slides in full form as David presented. So a full deck to review, and then in the time between that meeting and the following one, we'd do revisions and get to a near final work product to present to this group and discuss on November 13th.
And but almost certainly in the month of October, the drafting team is going to be needing to reach out to individuals for point feedback on a particular wording or on a particular fact, or we need you to help us go get the best information because we don't have it yet. So even though this looks like you only get to see the presentation twice, I think every individual will be pinged for something between now and November 1st. So we will be not exposing the full presentation, but for a specific topic, we'll say, here's what we're thinking, what's wrong with it? Because we want to get your feedback as often as possible and as early as possible.
And just building on that, David, if you have written comments on the outline, you can send them to me and I'll get them to the drafting team.
Please.
Yes, but so we set a deadline because we're gonna be powering forward. Sooner,
Yeah,
let's just say sooner is better.
Yeah. It's certainly, I mean, I'm going to be starting to work on these slides in the next couple of days. So if there's something big that needs to be redirected, I need to know about that soon.
Yeah, so if we could get, could we say Friday as at least a meaningful milestone for people to provide comments? I know, it was a lot to send the information out Friday, and here we are on Monday, but if you could submit any comments, send them to Jim, and we'll get them to the drafting group. All right. I think we are under the wire here. Is there anything else, David, as one of the co-chairs, that you wanted to raise?
As long as people are sort of okay with the outline, and as long as people don't have significant heartburn about our bucket definitions, I'm good. But please don't hide. If you have misgivings about the bucket definitions, please, this is sort of foundational. We need to make sure that people basically concur.
Yeah. Vivian.
Would be great if we could email things to the email list instead of just to the facilitators, or at least to the core team. If we had those emails, it would be helpful. Thanks.
I think I don't have, I'm just trying to make it a situation where we're sending fewer emails rather than more, but I think we identified the members of the drafting team up early in this presentation, and these slides are available. So Jim, we can just provide the email addresses for the members of the drafting team, if that makes it easier.
Yeah, I can certainly circulate those after this.
Okay. All right, anything else for today? I don't think so. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Oh, who's that?
It's Nicole, sorry.
Hi, Nicole.
I just wanted to put out there that I really want to see the importance of like those, if there are water right holders, what their obligations are and their requirements. Like we're talking about environmental requirements and flows. What do we expect of these water right holders?
I think we'll have a chance to talk about that in the drafting effort, and thanks for your willingness to review, Nicole. All right, anything else? No. All right.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.